the Community Development, General Government, and Housing Committee meeting for June 14th. All of the committee members are here. Councilmember Scipio, Vice Chair, Councilmember Robert Clark, and Councilmember Kevin Monday. And yours truly, Councilmember D.B. Adams. The City Council meeting to include adopting the 2022-2023 budget will be on Tuesday, June the 21st at 7 p.m. in the council chambers. And as Councilmember Clark said yesterday, Taylor, it's because of our Juneteenth holiday. There will be no city council or committee meetings also in the month of July because we give our staff and employees a break from that's Black holiday. So,
Staff Appreciation Month.
Clerk, please call. We have 7 consent items and 5 general agenda items. Are there any items that any committee member or council would like pulled from the consent agenda? Oh, you didn't put my mic on. I hope everyone heard me.
C4.
We have Councilmember Scipio, C4.
Bless you.
May I have, Councilmember Larson? Bless you.
C1, please.
C1.
Madam Chair, I'll move balance, approval of the balance.
We have a motion. May I have a second, please?
Second.
It's been moved and properly seconded, and we will now vote. And the motion passes. City Clerk, would you please call consent item C1, please?
Item C1, ordinance amending Chapter 2 of the City Code entitled Administration regarding remote participation in meetings. This item was remanded back to the Community Development Housing General Government Committee at the May 16, 2022 City Council meeting.
Thank you. Attorney Carmen.
Good afternoon, Mayor Pro Tem Adams and committee members. This item is, for the most part, just like the item that was considered last month. The only change that I've made is it no longer requires the approval of the other governmental entities appointing members to a city-county or a multi-purpose committee. So that requirement that the other governmental entities approve participating remotely by the committees is no longer required. So that has been removed. Otherwise, it remains the same. Briefly, if you look at Section 1, this ordinance amendment adds additional flexibility to allow council members to participate remotely. Now, this is individual council members, not the council members of council as a body. But the additional indication or basis for participating remotely says other emergencies that justify remote participation, such as a declaration or national, state, or local emergency covering the city. Skip that. That's already there. The one that's being added is 3, other scheduling conflicts that make in-person attendance impracticable. So that gives council members additional flexibility that the current ordinance does not have. And as it relates to boards and commissions, not the elected body, again, they will be able to participate remotely as a body if they agree in person to do so. There are certain exceptions to participating remotely as a body, and that those exceptions relate to having a public hearing or quasi-judicial proceeding. Those type of proceedings will have to be done in person unless the parties having standing all consent to a remote public hearing or quasi-judicial proceeding. So that's the change in a nutshell.
Thank you. Are there any questions from the committee or council members?
No, that answers it.
Councilmember Larson?
I'm satisfied.
Oh, you're satisfied? Okay.
I'm good, thank you.
May I have a motion,
I'll make
please?
a motion to approve C1.
Second.
All right, it's been moved and properly seconded, and may we now vote? And the motion passes. Thank you. Next item, please.
Item C4, ordinance amending Chapter 6 of the City Code entitled Animals and Fowl to revise the requirements for the keeping of chickens or other fowl and pigeons.
Mr. King.
Good afternoon, Mayor Pro Tem and council members. I just wanted to introduce Elizabeth Collier. She can come up and give a brief presentation if you like, or if there are specific questions, she can handle those.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, Mayor Pro Tempore Adams and committee member, council members.
Could we get a short summary of what we changed or what's different in this ordinance?
Yes, and I do have a PowerPoint, but I'm
Right?
not,
Is it long?
no.
All right, you're on.
Is it already on here? Is it loaded on here?
Okay, again, the item before you, of course, is revising standards for keeping chickens. The petitioners are planning development services and community development staff. The request is to amend Chapter 6 of the City Code to revise rules for keeping chickens or other fowl. Brief background, planning staff was asked to review City Code standards for keeping chickens earlier this year, I believe. An information item was presented at the last Community Development Housing General Government Committee meeting. At that time, staff was directed to develop revised standards for keeping chickens based on council comments at that time. And requirements for keeping chickens have been researched by planning staff for 8 peer cities in North Carolina. Our current ordinance standards, the ones that are most important here, the Cooper run must be set back a minimum of 100 feet from any adjacent property line. If that can't be met, notarized approval from adjoining neighbors can reduce setbacks to a minimum of 25 feet. The maximum number of chickens allowed is 5. No roosters are allowed, and a zoning permit must be approved to keep chickens in the city currently. So our peer city standards that we reviewed, we found that current coop run setbacks were generally more than about double of those peer cities. Most peer cities provide flexibility on the number of chickens or fowl allowed based on the lot size, and the majority of our peer cities do not require a zoning permit for keeping of chickens. So a text amendment summary for you, based on the committee feedback, best practices, and what staff is proposing, is reducing coop setbacks from adjacent property down to 20 feet, which is currently 100 feet, eliminating adjacent property owner approval requirement, allowing 5 chickens on lots that are up to 40,000 square feet, which is just under an acre, and allowing 10 chickens on lots over 40,000 square feet, which is just over an acre. And then also eliminating that need for a zoning permit approval. And I'll be happy to answer any questions or go back to any other slides or points.
Thank you so much. I
Thank
do
you.
know that we probably have questions or comments. Councilmember Scipio.
Yes, who is currently enforcing our chicken keeping ordinances?
Thank you, Councilmember Scipio. So the zoning permit is issued by planning development permit tech staffs. So that first approval process goes through our permitting office. Any enforcement issues down the road regarding chickens are handled by our code enforcement officers and community development.
Okay, so in the East Ward, we've had a lot of chicken sightings and loose chickens running around. And part of that's because of culture. I do believe a lot of it is culture. And I'm not so certain we are doing a good job in having people know what our ordinances are. Therefore, some of these setbacks aren't being enforced. You know, we have, in parts of the East Ward, we have small lots, but they have lots of chickens. So one of the things I want to understand is how big a problem is it currently in terms of enforcing this? And if we could have someone from community development tell us about what their experience is currently with the 5 chickens.
I would like to say, Councilmember Scipio, that one of the things that may help us going forward with the culture piece, and I do realize that, I don't know whether other council members understand what we mean, but we have included in our budget for 2022-23 the Office of Hispanic Affairs, that I am sure that one of their responsibilities that I've communicated in the hopefully posted job description is that they will be basically the outreach for our Latino Hispanic constituents and citizens, because unfortunately a lot of our ordinances and things are not in Spanish, and no one can talk to them in Spanish, and therefore, no, they don't understand not just our laws, state laws, federal laws, or any rules or ordinances. So I'm going to go ahead and recognize Ms. Richmond. Thank you.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Mayor Pro Tem Adams, members of the council. I'm Sharon Richmond, the Deputy Director of Community Development. In code enforcement, there's significant problems with chickens. The calls that we get and the complaints we get with chickens, most of the time people are not only just keeping 5 chickens. They have more than 5 chickens and then they'll add a rooster. The complaints that we get are already, people may have 2 jobs. They'll get off on their second job. They're awakened by a rooster. They complain that they see snakes coming after eggs. So it's a layered problem that unless you're beside a home where someone has chickens and you're the neighbor, it may not be noticeable. So it may be something that may be just a little bit more exploration into neighborhoods where there are more chickens in some wards than others. And for code enforcement, they're larger. If you had to rank the quality of life issues, what we are receiving from our citizens are housing, high grass, junked vehicles, abandonment of junked vehicles where kids can climb in, and of course, housing issues. Those are the problems that we're requested to look into more often. And code officers, which we have been short of through the pandemic, we are training some that have come in, and their priorities are the housing and the nuisance cases, which that has been the directive from most of what we hear from you and what we hear most of from citizens. So when we go out to a complaint about chickens, it's no way that, well, I shouldn't say no way, but it's difficult for a code officer to find out and follow chickens, to take the time to follow them to find out where they're going to end up or go. Because people will let them out and just let them run loose. So it's almost like a speed limit. If the sign says 45, people go 55. So if you say you have 5, people end up with 10. And if they let them roam, then it's a bigger problem with someone who has to go out and enforce an ordinance and then determine the lot size. So it's going to be problematic unless there's, I don't know. I can hear the complaints. We already hear the complaints. So that gives you a flavor of what we already hear. So if that helps.
Thank you.
One more question, if I may.
Councilmember Monday.
What is done with those stray chickens? Are they collected and
No, we don't
confiscated?
pick up. No, we don't pick up
Chickens go back home to roost for folks that don't live in the country or been on a farm. Wherever, they're just like your pets. Or cow, they go back. Chickens go back.
My thought is that if they never go back, because they're confiscated, maybe they'll be more likely to keep them at home. So I wonder if that should not be built into the ordinance.
Thank you. Councilmember Burke, and then Councilmember Clark.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. I have concerns that are similar to Councilmember Scipio's in my ward. We do see loose chickens and roosters in the streets, and those are many complaints that my constituents call in and report. I'm concerned today that we are adding more to code enforcement, and I don't know about anyone else, but I need more code enforcers in the Northeast Ward, and we've been waiting for more to be trained because we have some issues that need to be addressed, and I believe they have just been sitting and waiting. And I'm just concerned about adding more to the code enforcement officers at this point. Right now, we have problems that we need to have addressed, and to add more, I don't think would be wise. I would love it if it were possible to have the addition of roosters, the request made on an individual basis, because all communities are not the same, all neighborhoods are not the same, all neighbors are not the same. So if we could just do on a case-by-case basis as far as an increase in numbers, that would work well. Thank you.
Councilmember Clark.
Are chickens have to be in the coops, or can they roam free?
They can roam in the yard.
They should.
Thank you, Councilmember Clark. Chickens are required to stay inside an enclosed run or coop at all times. They're not supposed to roam.
Free range.
Yeah,
They can't
correct.
fly, so if you got
Well, it's supposed to be enclosed, top, bottom, sides, all of that, if that makes sense.
yeah, thank you, ma'am.
You're welcome.
The history of the chickens goes back to former Councilmember Molly Light and myself. When the country was finally realizing, and even Winston, that we had a food disparity in deserts in our city, whereas children and seniors and special needs weren't able to afford protein. You can have vegetables, but if you don't have a protein, and if you talk to your doctors, they'll tell you whether it's salmon, whether it's chicken, poultry, whether it's beef, whether it's pork, you need proteins in your body, especially for children and those suffering from illnesses and whatever. When we did this, I think, Mr. King, we might have been one of the first cities to actively have an ordinance on chickens and fowls, and soon after, other cities began to follow us. I see chickens roaming the street, but as Ms. Richmond said in community development, I don't think the #1 priority in this city is chickens. And those, Mr. Mundy and others that venture out, trust me, somebody like me know how to grab a chicken and have it on the table in 2 hours. But I hear what you're saying, but again, I always like to caution you. I know we have less staff, but now we're in a balancing act. Do we pull back on ordinances that improve the quality of life of our citizens, or do we stop and say, we're not going to do this, that, or others because we don't have enough staff? Our job is to keep the lights on and to try to provide the services to the citizens of Winston-Salem. I hear the thing about having it by a ward or case-by-case deal. I don't know whether other cities have done that. I think that can be a problem because now you might be discriminating against people who see others exercising their right to have food. This is just a thought. I really we're trying to get this through before August. Councilmember Scipio. Councilmember Larson, then Scipio.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. A couple of questions, maybe for the attorney office here or somebody that, or maybe planning who's submitting this. Am I to understand correctly, this is by right and that there's no permitting involved, and if I want to raise chickens, I can, after this ordinance is passed, I can have up to 5 or 10, depending on the size of the lot?
Councilmember Larson, we can barely hear you.
I'm sorry. Let me see if I can get closer.
That
here.
works.
There we go. The question really involves what kind of permitting or review is offered, or is this by right that anybody can have 5 chickens if they have 40,000 square feet?
So as long as they meet the other standards that are in the current code.
Setbacks and whatever, that they can have chickens.
Right. It would be by right, correct.
So I'm a little bothered by the number 10 as sort of in the break line at 40,000 square feet. The 10 seems like an awful lot of chickens if I have 40,005 feet. To put 10 chickens on that lot seems to me an awful lot of chickens when we have issues of how many are running around. But my real question revolves around slaughtering chickens and whether or not there's anything in this ordinance that precludes the slaughtering or harvesting of killing chickens in the city yard.
Thank you for your question, Councilmember Larson. The ordinance language today does specify that slaughtering is allowed. It has to be done out of sight of public view or adjacent properties and generally to the rear of the principal dwelling and in a sanitary manner and everything disposed of properly.
And we had this in the prior ordinance as well, that slaughtering was allowed.
Yeah, I just know what happens when you cut the head off of a chicken, where it goes. You know, it's my concern, but if you think you can contain it. Do we have any complaints about slaughtering? Have we had any complaints in the history of the current ordinance?
Thank you for the question. Councilmember Larson, I can't speak to that. I'm sorry.
It'd be maybe inspections or somebody. I'm just curious as to whether this is an issue or not. Maybe it's not an issue.
Thank you. Councilmember Clark.
Madam Chairman, given the number of questions here, I think we ought to hold this in committee for a month and have any council members that have specific questions to get back with the planning folks. And let's be sure we got all our T's dotted here. So I'll make a motion that we hold it in committee.
Second.
It's been moved and probably seconded. All those in favor, let it be known by voting.
Have you voted?
Do we need to vote verbally, clerk? Okay, thank you.
All in favor, say cockle-doodle.
I'm with you. Thank you, Councilman Clark. If, City Clerk, we will now move to the general agenda.
Item G1, consideration of ordinances amending Chapter 2 entitled Administration to create A, Section 239, sale or lease of city-owned property for affordable housing purposes, and B, 2 through 10, City of Winston-Salem Housing Justice Act.
Attorney Carmen.
Good afternoon again. If I could get the clerk to bring up the chart, which is the second PDF in the agenda package. Thank you. Can you control it from your seat?
No.
Okay. I just have 2 pages, I promise, that I'm going to talk about. If you will go to page 5.
Okay.
I'm not going to go through the 2 ordinances that you have before you. I will just address the changes that have been made in their brief.
Thank you.
The changes relate to the affordability period, the length of the affordability period. As you will see on page 5, as it relates to individual lots sold for home ownership, it has been changed from 30 years to at least 15 years. And as it relates to rental property, essentially, the affordability period has been changed from 50 for a sale, 99 for lease years to 30 years, at least 30 years. made those changes after discussions with council members and others, and looking at the affordability period used by other cities such as Charlotte and Durham for their affordable housing programs. So that's one change. Now, in the Housing Justice Act, on page 10, Sandra, I promise this is the last time, you'll see the one change that I made with respect to the Housing Justice Act. And again, the Housing Justice Act contained an affordability period as well. And that has been changed from 30 years for single-family housing to at least 15 years, and for multifamily housing to at least 30 years. So now they're both 15 years, rather. I'm sorry. 15 years for single-family housing and 30 years for multifamily housing, to make it consistent, basically, with the ordinance as it relates to the sale or lease of city-owned property. Hopefully, I haven't confused you.
Thank you, Attorney.
So those are the changes.
Thank you. Are there any questions or comments? Councilmember Clark, then Scipio, then McIntosh.
Ms. Carmen, how do we, someone buys a single-family house, 5 years later they want to sell it, how do we calculate what maximum they can sell it for and still meet this requirement?
We don't have a limit on what they can sell it for. What you're looking at is basically if you have a buyer that's interested in buying it and they need assistance from one of the HUD programs, you look at what the HUD guidelines provide at that time, the type of assistance and the amount of assistance they will provide. For example, as it stands right now, if you have a buyer that's in the low to moderate income range and they're wanting to buy a piece of property, I think the HUD guidelines allow up to $274,000 for a new home and a little less than that for a existing home, if they want to buy an existing home. So it's not a limit on what they can directly sell for. It's a limit to, so to speak, in terms of what the buyer can qualify for under the program and have assistance for.
Okay, but if HUD will not allow them to pay but a certain amount?
If HUD will not.
You're telling me HUD's got limits?
Well, HUD has limits in terms of how much assistance they will provide.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. But if the potential buyer can come up with whatever amount of money, there is no real cap? My concern is someone buys a house, you hope that the potential for appreciation and building equity will entice them to improve it and keep it nice and all those type things. Mm-hmm. But I'm struggling with that, with how do we have it here where we've got some type of requirements I don't quite understand that may limit, well, yeah, you've taken great care of your house, but you can't sell it but for X amount.
But see, we're not telling them they can't sell it for X amount. It's just that we're saying, if you want to sell it, let's try to get someone that is in that income range, low and moderate income. Now, if that person qualifies, a lot of times they will need assistance in the programs that we have. They can get assistance up to a certain amount. So that person, the buyer, basically will have a pool of money from the programs that we have to provide assistance in purchasing the property. So
but if they want to just sell it to anyone who walks in off the street, they are not restricted.
If they want to sell it to someone who walks off the street that's not low and moderate income, doesn't fit the guidelines, then what they will need to do is have council come back and look at it and revise the affordability period limitations. And council could very well say, yes, we give you approval to sell it to someone outside of that low and moderate income range. And in fact, that's kind of what we do now already for the programs, in particular multifamily programs that we have in place. We put restrictions on properties all the time. It's just a question of how long.
Yeah, well, to me, single family is much different than multifamily apartments. And I'm just concerned we are enticing people not to care for their property because they can only get X amount of money for it. And you're telling me, yeah, they can put it on open market, but they got to come to council and we got to approve it and change this, that, and the other.
But think about what they can get on the open market. If you have somebody, again, HUD revises its standards every year, but right now, individual in the low to moderate income range could purchase property up to $274,000. And I mean, that's a pretty
Yeah, that's
substantial
nice.
amount of money.
Yeah, agreed.
And this, excuse me, Attorney Carmen, am I right in knowing that other cities have already reassessed their affordability too over the past year or two, whether it's Durham, Charlotte, Raleigh, Greensboro, as to how, again, we try to address the lack of housing, but all of us know that there are a lot of affordable units that have had requirements built in years ago, that they are all rolling off the books and there is nothing we can do about it. So if we don't provide this sort of housing for low to moderate income and others, then we're basically putting them out of the market because they'll never be able to afford where they can stay or buy. Councilmember Scipio, then Councilmember McIntosh.
Can I respond to your question?
Yes,
if
go
I
ahead.
may?
I'm sorry.
And yes, you are correct. In fact, we've sort of learned from Charlotte and Durham, who've been doing this for quite a while. They started out with longer affordability periods. They came back and revised those to what we see today. They started out with specific requirements in terms of having properties in every ward that's available, and they came back and revised that. Now they're going back. So as I looked at other communities, they have ordinances in place that they've kind of tried and come back and revised, learned lessons from, and modified. And as I've always said, you can adopt an ordinance and agree to come back in a year or two if you see there's a need for a change, and change it. Again, you can start with the 15 years, which again is a change from the 30 years. Start with the 15. If you see that's problematic, you can come back and revise it and look at something shorter than 15 years. But you have that flexibility to do it. Now, if you start with a shorter period of time and then find out you started with a period that's too short, you can't do anything about that. Because at that point in time, you cannot go back and undo what you've done with respect to those properties that have already been sold. But if you start with 15 and decide maybe 7 is better, you can always modify those restrictions and put in a shorter period of time. There's no harm to that particular property owner, but the reverse is problematic.
Councilmember Scipio.
Yes, thank you. I have just a couple of concerns about the policy, about the ordinance. One being, are we intentionally creating a next generation of low-income density neighborhoods or properties? And part of me says no, because most of our city property are single lots. So therefore, they're going into existing neighborhoods, not large complexes that we are going to be building. We didn't have a lot of those large pieces of land in our list of lots. But when I thought about what do we do in these neighborhoods with these single lots, who approves the designs of what's going to get built so that it's in the character of what's already there? So that's a concern on how do we just have people come in and put up anything without having any input from anyone. And so I have that concern. And then I thought the other thing is, in this policy, should we put in there some type of cost factor? For instance, if we sell these lots, our city-owned lots, to a nonprofit, are we going to sell it to them for a nominal cost, like $1, so that they can develop the lot? Or do we sell all of these as whatever the tax value is? Do we need to put some type of incentives there so the lots can be sold and designated affordable?
Okay. If I may, I'll be happy to.
Attorney.
Okay. Your first question, let me sort of remind the committee that the ordinance itself, while the focus is on low and moderate income persons, the program itself focuses on low and moderate income persons, housing for that group, as well as housing for workforce housing and market rate housing. It is a blend of all of those. So in other words, we're not looking just to create housing for low and moderate income persons. If you go back and look at the percentages actually talk about all three, because you want to create a stable community where you have housing that serves basically all of those groups, okay? And then, I guess, in terms of the lots themselves, we don't want to necessarily set forth in the ordinance what the price will be. Keep in mind that the sale itself will have to come back to City Council for approval. And you have, as City Council, all of those provisions that are listed in the ordinance available to you, where you can sell to a nonprofit carrying out a public purpose. You can sell to a for-profit at a discounted rate. So you have all of the sale procedures, including the one you just got last year, available to you. But those sales will have to be approved ultimately by City Council. Now, you will also see in the draft ordinance a reference to a request for proposals. So the ideal is for each council member that have lots in his or her ward, staff is going to sit down with the council members, work on an RFP process, and we have samples from other communities, work on an RFP process that includes design, things that the council member wants to see in terms of the housing that's constructed on those lots. And so then the RFP will go out based upon that design and the criteria that has been basically approved, and hopefully we'll get buyers that are for-profit, nonprofit, and so forth. So that's one approach. It's also possible that the council member of the ward may have an entity in mind, Habitat for Humanity, for example, that's interested in some lots. And so you might have the buyer in mind, then the question becomes, okay, what are you going to design? Then it's the staff working with the council member on that design. Because at the end of the day, this does not take away control from the council member at all. This is just a guide in terms of trying to help the council members of the ward and the council as a whole address this affordability crisis.
Absolutely.
Again, we got to get started and work on the units that you all need, and we can come back in a year or two. If that affordability requirement is too long, we can adjust it. We can modify the restrictions that have already been placed on record and shorten those. But we've got to find a way to get started and help the individual council members in their ward get started with addressing not just affordable housing for low and moderate income persons, but the other housing as well. Because again, it is a blend of housing, because that's necessary to have a stable community.
Absolutely. Thank you, Attorney. Councilman McIntosh.
I want to thank Attorney for saying, let's get started, because we really do need to get started. We're
How many times we going to have to
tripping
say
over
that?
ourselves over micromanaging this, trying to make perfect when we should be looking at good. We need to build housing. I think we need to be very careful when we start to talk about design, because the state of North Carolina, state legislature is not going to tolerate an awful lot of discussion about how we can limit design. In the end, we need more housing units, and a lot of them. And so anything we can do to incent people to build more housing units across the price spectrum, the better off our citizens will be. Whether they're low income or high income, everybody benefits from new housing. I do want to just call our attention to, and I appreciate the change from 30 to 15. I think we may want to go back, but it's something that we as a council can do over time. The average period that a person holds a single-family home is 7 years. And so 15 years is double that. So we may find that we are placing more restriction on people than is good for them. But then again, I'm happy to go from where we were to where we are now. I do also want to talk about on page 2 on the chart where it talks about commercial property. I think the city needs to look at all of its land holdings that could be converted to housing. One thing I'm going to throw out there, and this may strike some people as odd, but we've got a parking lot just north of here, just north of this building, that would be an ideal place for an affordable housing project. And that's property that we own, and we could contribute to a project, and it would. We get a lot of grief about not incentivizing affordable housing downtown. That's an opportunity. We've got lots of parking decks. We've got big parking uses that are moving from here to there. So I think we need to get very granular on what we own and how we can best put it into service for additional housing. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. As the attorney has said, every law, ordinance, resolution we vote on, we can always come back. We can amend, we can edit, we can learn from good, bad, better, and make it fit what we want. But again, we cannot keep kicking this housing thing down the road, people. We can't. Eventually, like I've already told everybody, the city and the people that are suffering, eventually they're going to be down here, and they're going to hold this council accountable for us not getting something done. All right, could I get a motion?
Move to approve G1.
I have a motion. May I have a second? I second the motion. All those in favor, please vote. And if we need, again, a staff, I know you guys got your plates full. I know you're trying to bring in new staff and others and train them. But on this right here, because this is our number one priority, if you could reach out to individual council members and let them know that you are willing to help them understand our housing ordinance. You know how when you get a reading list, when you go to a conference or something, could you put together a reading list of the past documentation and ordinances that we have done in the past 10 years to further housing in Winston-Salem so that they can get and others can get caught up? It wouldn't hurt also to get with marketing to see if we can put it out there on our social media when it comes to anything housing going forward, Mr. Garrity. City Clerk, would you please call the next item?
Item G2, information regarding ward redistricting process.
Mr. King, this is for information.
That is correct. So
That's
yes,
correct.
This is just information. We're not taking any votes or any recommendations today. So this has been a long time coming in light of the information we got from the 2020 census. And so I'll just kind of run through a brief summary for you. Some of this will seem like old hat. We talked about it a little while ago, just a kind of overview of why we're doing this. And this is really to comply with state statutes, basically on the heels of a decennial census. And the goal of our efforts with the redistricting are to ensure the one person, one vote standard. We have to do this by law if any one of our wards is out of the standard, the legally acceptable standard of plus or minus 5%. I think the South Ward was the one that threw us out at 6% being out of kilter. And when we have done this in the past, while the legal standard is plus or minus 5%, we have generally gone for a much tighter deviation. And our goal this time, as we told you originally, was plus or minus 2%. What we'll talk about today and what's included in your agenda materials is basically all 8 wards are below plus or minus 1%. We'll just kind of walk through the metrics and the methodology of kind of what we shared with you back when we began this process. So the rules that we followed were to make sure we kept council members within their existing wards. Our intent was to preserve the core of the existing wards. As I told you, 2% or less deviation. We currently have 4 majority-minority wards. We were trying to preserve that threshold and that balance. We didn't want to split census blocks by ward boundaries, and we tried to want to make sure that our ward boundaries followed logical boundaries. So I'm not going to go through each individual ward map. You've got those in your packets, each individual map that I think you all have seen before that shows kind of your existing ward in tan, areas that are leaving the ward in red, areas that are coming to the ward in green. I think everybody's seen that, and again, they're included in the materials there. So on the left-hand side of this slide are the metrics that I just reviewed with you. And so for numbers 1, 2, 5, and 6, we have done those. It's hard to see on this map, but I can tell you we have kept everybody in their existing wards. I believe we've preserved the core of those wards. We did not split any census blocks in our efforts, and we've tried to use logical boundaries as part of our work. This data table is included on your overall map. It's included on each one of the maps, and this kind of gives you a breakdown of each of the total populations, our target population. So in a perfect world, all 8 wards would have 31,193 folks within the ward. As I shared with you, our target deviation was 2%. We got you under 1%, and you can see that there in that column. I think our furthest deviation is 0.8%, and that equates to about 251 people. Again, that's out of a ward of 30,000, 31,000 plus. We talked a little bit about our 4 majority-minority wards. I would tell you in our category here, we actually have 5 majority-minority wards, that being east, north, northeast, southeast, and south. So we actually have 5 majority-minority wards in this proposal that's before you today. I'll walk through a little bit of the kind of the next steps. We want to get this to you as an information item to begin the process. What we would look to do is get some insight from the committee today and intend to hold some in-person meetings, drop-in meetings over the course of the summer to allow the public to give comments on the draft map. We'd also look to utilize social media and our city website to collect comments, and then we would aim to return back to the full council in September, October. We would give you the draft map. We would give you all the comments we've received through our public outreach. And at that point, it's up to the council as far as which way they want to proceed. Procedurally, to adopt the map, City Council would need to hold a public hearing. That's best practice. As we've learned from the School of Government, we would certainly recommend doing that. And then you would adopt a resolution in support of your new map. After the adoption of the map, the city would mail postcards to all residents within the city limits with information about their respective council member at that time. So I know that's kind of a high-level summary. We've been at this for a while, and again, you've got a lot of information in your packet. So I'm certainly glad to answer any questions, and I've got Kevin Edwards from Planning and Development Services staff here with me today. Kevin did a lot of the heavy lifting on this, and I want to thank him publicly for his hard work on this. This was not an easy task. This was not an easy task, and certainly not getting to the level of deviation that we got to. So I want to publicly thank Kevin for that.
Thank you, Mr. King. Thanks, Kevin, and all of the staff in planning. Thank you very much. Are there any comments or questions? Again, this is information only. I think what they're looking for is basically we now have to get this to the people. That's the main thing, because they have been waiting for over a year when the county and everybody else has been finished, and the districts throughout North Carolina. Only because we did not run for reelection in 20 we didn't have to have the maps done on time. And because we didn't run in 22 or anything, we didn't have to have the maps done. But now we're at the point where we have to get these maps done. Any comments or questions?
West Ward looks fine.
Councilmember Scipio.
Yes. Mr. King, thank you and Kevin for all your work. It was a fascinating process to go through since it was my first time going through it. And a couple of things that were very significant for me to understand was that we are not going to split census blocks, which have been split in the past. But this year makes really good sense to have. That's not right?
Councilmember Scipio, I don't know that they were split in the past. I think one of the things that happened is the Census Bureau redrew the blocks. And so they look different now if you compare them to previous.
Yes.
So I want to make that clarification.
And so I really think that was the aha moment, that when people look at it, why did we move from one thing to another? It's because we tried to keep those census blocks whole.
That's correct.
And the other thing is that staff made certain changes, recommendations to try to balance out the population. And you also took into account requests from council members, the things that they may have wanted or wanted to keep. In the East Ward, I do want to state that I am not in favor of Councilmember Taylor's request to acquire Bowman Gray Stadium, Silverton Park. It is not, it's only 88 people in that census block. It's not about moving people. So I am certainly not in favor of that. So I will be, to the council members, I will be making that a formal request to have it remain in the East Ward. My primary reason is because Bowman Gray Stadium and Silverton Park are connected to Winston-Salem State University, which is in the East Ward, and I believe it would be just too awkward for the university to have two council members having to confer with them over our property, the city's property. So that's number one in terms of quality of service. The other one is that Bowman Gray Stadium is really connected to Columbian Heights community and has been since that particular neighborhood was developed in the 1930s. And that would stay in the East Ward, and the stadium should be together, in my opinion. We are going to receive, I hope, by August, the revitalization plan that we initiated for that neighborhood that actually has a great deal to do with the stadium property. So I just wanted to make that comment that I'm not in favor of that.
Understood.
Thank you. Again, information. Again, if you have comments or things you want to communicate to staff, you have an opportunity to do that. Thank you, Mr. King.
Thank you.
All right, next item, please, City Clerk.
Item G3, information on agreement with Louisiana Homebuyer Education Collaborative Incorporated for technical assistance to create a multi-year housing plan.
Thank you, and this item is for information as well. Ms. Richmond? Thank you.
Good afternoon again. Mayor Pro Tem and members of the council. So I'm back again to explain to you this, or share with you this information item from the Housing Coalition, the Winston-Salem Housing Coalition, and I'll be brief by just going directly into the PowerPoint.
And just so the council, the committee and the council know, we have two other items that require our attention as well today. Again, this is our last community development meeting until August. So I look at the clock, I got 35 minutes. So between the three of you, that means nobody has more than 10 minutes. I'd like to see you at 7 or 8. And that includes questions and comments.
Well,
Ms. Richmond.
the good thing is I can't answer any questions.
You are, Ms. Richmond.
So I'll be taking your questions and taking it back to the coalition, and they'll talk about those specifically, and we'll get back with you. So this proposal is from the Housing Coalition and Housing NOLA. And Housing NOLA has submitted a proposal to the Affordable Housing Coalition to create a community-informed 10-year housing plan. This is a nonprofit organization that our Housing Coalition has taken a look at to provide technical assistance to communities like ours to maximize the effectiveness of resources in non-traditional resources to assist investors in the private sector in housing and community development. So what I'd like to do is, without going into reading all of this, because I think you all have a copy of all the details of the information packet, and you have a copy of the housing plan proposal, I'll just go in and let you know that there are two different technical assistance plans that they've proposed, and our coalition decided to go with option 2. They think that's the best plan. The difference between the two plans, one has 4 quarters. The option 1 has 4 quarters, and you can see that on the screen. This one shows community engagement, data, policy development and implementation, communications and marketing, management, and general expenses. The second one goes into another level of detail and adds in the same items, but then it has a capacity building section that adds in another layer of detail and capacity building. So that and it adds in 6 more months of which adds up to be 6 quarters altogether. And you can see in the slide the same amount of details that you have in option 1, and capacity building, again, as in that extra level of detail from Housing NOLA that they would provide into the community to build capacity in the community and get the citizens engaged. That's their specialty. There's not another organization that provides this level of service that Housing NOLA provides. So I'll be happy to take any of your questions back to the Housing Coalition, whatever you have.
Councilmember Monday. Thank you, Ms. Richmond.
Yes, thank you, Ms. Richmond. Can you remind me who all is on the Housing Coalition, if there are specific roles or there are people who are nominated?
Excuse me, Councilmember Monday. Ms. Richmond and staff can get that to you. There's also our website that has the commissions on it with the members, but staff can provide that to you with their occupations, what's their level of expertise, what do they bring to the table, and their appointment years and that sort of thing.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Any other questions? Councilmember McIntosh.
More observations than questions. I'm always a little bit nervous when I see sole bid contracts when there's only one group. No offense, but it seems to me like there are lots of people, lots of organizations in the country that deal with similar situations. So I'd really love to see another number. But coming back to let's get this done. I do look at the difference between the lesser expensive option and more expensive option, and I see items that I think that we have done an awful lot of already in our community. We've been working at this now with plans and capacity building for a long time. I would rather spend less money than more, because more money means more money we can put into actual housing projects. The other thing is I want to make sure this is an 18-month narrative here we're looking at. I need to make sure that this does not stall us from moving forward with other projects, waiting on this for this to be done. They need to be concurrent, and we just need to get as many houses up out of the ground as we can as quickly as possible.
Thank you, Councilman McIntosh. Any other questions, comments? One of the things that, again, council members have been asking for a plan, a 10-year plan. We need a plan. Well, we have some other plans, and now we're bringing you this plan because we kept hearing this. And just for information and disclosure, this idea has been kicked around for the past 3.5 years, even before COVID, about bringing in somebody to help us. I know we have a lot of nonprofit groups and national groups that do capacity building, but we have not been able to do significant capacity building when it comes to housing and bringing in those people that we really need at the table. We need community, but we've got to have business. We've got to have the financial connections. We got to have everybody in every category that we can think of to help us with this, trying to get this done. So I do agree with Councilmember McIntosh that I think we start with the $138,000 if we're going to do an option. And as we've heard the attorney say, we can build on anything. If we see that as we're moving and holding this agency or whoever accountable, and they're working with our coalition, this is not somebody that doesn't live in Winston, has no connectivity to us. These are people that the mayor appointed and the city council voted on. So they're trying to do their job as well because they're just a little bit antsy like everybody else, that we're not able to get off the block. Can we go forward with communicating the staff, Ms. Richmond, Ms. Newman, Ms. Tony, and the city manager, that we would like to see this come forward? If we we'd like to see it come forward at council, or do we want to make a motion to, what do we do?
It's listed as for information only, so I would imagine it will come back in August to this committee and then to full council.
The next week? Okay, thank you. Thank you, Ms. Richmond, very much. Again, any council members with any concerns, please get with Ms. Tony, Ms. Richmond, or Mr. Garrity, okay? Next item, please.
Item G4, Minority and Women-Owned Business Enterprise Annual Report for Fiscal Year 2020, 2021, and Disparity Study Implementation Plan.
Good afternoon, Mayor Pro Tem Adams and members of City Council. I'm going to try to stick to my time frame, Mayor Pro Tem Adams. Let's see. Okay. My name is Jakira Westbrook, and I am the Business Inclusion Manager for the Office of Business Inclusion and Advancement. Can you hear me? Sorry.
Take the mask off. We got a screen, you got a screen up. We good.
Forgive me. So this afternoon, I will provide you all with the MWBE annual report for fiscal year 2020 through 2021. And just some highlights. So this is the months of the onset of the pandemic and during the height of the pandemic. So construction and repair purchase orders placed with MWBE firms equaled 5.31%, and that did surpass the past 2 fiscal years. About 90 MWBE firms joined the city's vendor listing to be notified of upcoming bidding opportunities. Local bidding opportunities, as well as resources from other local and city agencies for MWBEs. So during the pandemic, we transitioned to web-based workshops and seminars to continue to provide that staple education to MWBE firms, and more than 200 firms attended those events in relation to meeting the MWBE requirements for the city's policy. So just a quick overview of the spend. So there's 4 categories in which we track MWBE spend, and that includes construction and repair, subcontracting activity, procurement card spending, and goods and services. And the graph over to your right just provides a quick glimpse of those different categories, and I'll go into those in a little bit more detail. So for fiscal year 2020 through 2021, the total spend was $216 million, with $15.8 million being spent with MWBEs, $7.7 million was spent with MWBEs, and $8 million was spent with WBEs. So we'll go into the 4 different categories. So first we have subcontracting, and that accounts for all formal range construction projects that were closed out in the fiscal year. So for 2020 through 21, the total was $21.3 million, with $3.4 million being spent with MWBEs. And so just one thing to point out here is that a project could be awarded in one fiscal year, active in another, and then closed out in this fiscal year. And this accounts for all dollars paid to contractors. Next is procurement card spending, and this accounts for all spend for purchases made by city staff, with them having like a physical P card for purchases that don't go through the formal or informal bidding process. So for 2020, the total was $3 million, with $152,000 being spent with MWBEs. I will point out that this data is contingent upon the user, and so city staff does have the ability to share their upcoming purchases with MWBEs by filling out the upcoming purchase opportunity form, and our office distributes that within our weekly email. Of the $3 million, 71% was spent within Forsyth County, and 68% was spent within Winston-Salem. Next is the construction and repair purchase orders, and this accounts for all active city spending within the fiscal year for formal and informal projects. And so for fiscal year 2020 through 21, the total spend was $60.5 million, with $3.2 million spent with MWBEs. And similar to the subcontracting activity, a project could be awarded in one year and active in another. The next category is the goods and services, and this is essentially like a catch-all category. So included in this could be bulk services, bulk supplies, services, software, as well as a lot of the PPE equipment that was purchased during the pandemic. And so the $131 million that was spent within fiscal year 2020 through 21 accounted for more than half of the city's spend, and $9 million was spent with MWBEs. So beyond the spend, I'll move on to the disparity study update. So our staff has included a budget request in the fiscal year 2022-23 to implement data software that would help us track key performance measures and analyze MWBE utilization data. So currently we utilize Microsoft Excel, and this software is a critical piece in addressing the disparities identified in the report and implementation of those recommendations. And that concludes my presentation, and I'll take any questions if you have any.
I'm sure you know from the city manager, again, I was at the, and Councilmember Scipio and Councilmember Burke at the state of North Carolina, blacks in North Carolina when it comes to business and MWBEs or and we recognize that COVID changed our metrics or our ability to increase participation. As we all can look at the numbers, when you look at pre-COVID in 17-18, we were at 13.3% of total MWBA spending. And then COVID hit in 19 and 20 and even 21, basically. And now we're back down to 5.31%. Do you have any idea or conclusion as to why the numbers are so low? I would expect it when I read them the other day. I let the city manager know I was quite disappointed because I knew they would drop, but I didn't know they would drop like this. So could you just give us a couple of examples? And they told us at the seminar, the conference, of what caused this drop. And how are we, or do we have a plan going forward to help try to get minorities and women back in the pipeline, particularly with the infrastructure and other monies that we all have received?
Yes, Mayor Pro Tem Adams. So I would say that a lot of the businesses COVID did impact those businesses, and either they did close or they experienced issues with their workforce. And so with a lot of our construction and repair projects, we established goals for those projects, but we probably seen the most good faith efforts that we have seen in the past couple of years. And so some ways that we are looking to address and help provide opportunities for more minority businesses to do business with the city. We did increase our certification days to get those firms certified, so going from 1 certification day a year to going to 4. We also are looking into some small business bidding assistant programs. So I'm looking at other peer cities to see how they have implemented similar programs to help with those issues that we've seen.
Thank you. I just want to let you know, Ms. Westbrook, and then Mr. Councilmember Mundy, that thank you and the staff in that office. You have basically, over the past couple of years, stepped up our A game, and I appreciate that in light of a pandemic. So I'm looking forward to hopefully seeing some improvements And I've heard that you do have, your office and staff have a lot of suggestions. You are benchmarking, and one of the things they discussed at the conference was your good faith effort and your workshop online, was your good faith effort good enough? In other words, just don't check the box.
Right.
That it's our responsibility to make sure that all of these things are being taken care of. Councilmember Mundy.
Thanks for bringing us up to date. I have a question. I heard you mention goals once. Are there goals for each of these measurements?
So a disparity study recommendation is for us to establish aspirational goals, so that it will be goals for the overall city to achieve as a whole. So with that software that we're recommending, it would allow us to track those key performance measures.
Right.
Okay, thank you.
Any other comments or questions? Thank you, Ms. Westbrook.
Thank you.
so much. City Clerk, please call the final item, please.
Item G5, information on the Clean Cities Coalition regional effort in eastern, northeastern, and central North Carolina through the North Carolina Clean Energy Technology Center.
Ms. Peplowski. Yes. Welcome.
Thank you. Good evening, Mayor Pro Tem Adams, members of the committee, and members of the City Council. I'm here today to talk a little bit about the Clean Cities Coalition and introduce that idea. This is something that some of our staff are interested in participating in. So the city has been approached to become a stakeholder in the central region of the newly proposed Clean Cities Coalition. Currently, there are already 3 smaller coalitions within the state of North Carolina that cover the Charlotte, Raleigh-Durham, and then the Asheville-Buncombe County areas, leaving out a significant portion of the state. So the North Carolina Clean Energy Technology Center has come up with this proposal that would help reach the rest of the underserved areas of the state, which do include the central region, which we would be a part of if we choose to become stakeholders. It's a free opportunity, does not require any financial commitments, but would provide a number of technical assistance that would be very critical to staff in a number of departments within the city, and especially right now with the number of upcoming and current funding opportunities available at various levels for alternative fuel and electric vehicles. So staff is continuing to learn more and get in contact with folks from that Clean Energy Technology Center. But yes, this is something we're excited about, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Councilmember Larson. Thank you, Ms. Peplowski.
Was this not brought up at the TAC meeting last?
Yes, sorry, I did mean to mention that. It was approved by the MPO.
It was approved by TAC for Winston-Salem or MPO to be part of this coalition.
Correct. Any other comments, questions? Thank you, Ms. Peplowski.
Thank you.
Looking forward to it. Anything that we can do to, again, keep pace to some degree with our other counterparts to the west or to the east, lower east, it's a good thing. Is there anything else for the good of the order? Because this committee will not meet again until the second Tuesday in August. All minds, hearts, heads clear. This meeting is adjourned.